"You don't belong in this seat," she sneered, waving her boarding pass like a weapon. "Security, get him out." It was the moment that ended an airline. A black CEO sitting quietly in seat 1A was humiliated, dragged out of first class, and treated like a criminal to make room for a wealthy white passenger who claimed the seat was hers. The crew laughed. The pilot sneered. They thought he was nobody. They didn't know that the man they were kicking off the plane had signed a secret document 3 hours earlier, a document that made him the new owner of the entire airline. What happened next wasn't just revenge. It was a masterclass in instant karma that left the entire airport frozen in shock. You are not going to believe how this ends. The interior of the Boeing 777, operated by the prestigious Regal Atlantic Airways, smelled of expensive leather and conditioned air. In seat 1A, the most coveted spot on the plane, sat Marcus Sterling. To the casual observer, Marcus didn't scream, "Billionaire." He was dressed in a dark-fitted cashmere hoodie, black joggers, and pristine white sneakers. He wore no watch, at least not one that flashed diamonds, and his noise-cancelling headphones were resting around his neck. He was a man who understood that true power didn't need to shout. He was 42, with the build of a former linebacker, and eyes that held the sharp, terrifying intelligence of a man who built empires for sport. Marcus wasn't just a passenger. He was the founder and CEO of Sterling Vanguard, a private equity firm that had, as of 8:00 a.m. that morning, in a closed-door meeting in New York, acquired a controlling stake in Regal Atlantic Airways. The ink was barely dry. The press release was scheduled for tomorrow. Today, he was flying incognito to London to visit the European headquarters. He wanted to see how his new employees treated their customers when they thought no one was watching. He was sipping a glass of sparkling water, reviewing a merger contract on his tablet, when the peace of the first-class cabin was shattered. "Excuse me, I think there's been a mistake." The voice was shrill, carrying that specific frequency of entitlement that makes flight attendants flinch. Marcus didn't look up immediately. He assumed it was a luggage issue. "Stewardess, I said there is a mistake." Marcus glanced up. Standing in the aisle was a woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a factory that specialized in wealthy indignation. She wore a Chanel suit that was slightly too tight, massive sunglasses despite being indoors, and she was pointing a manicured finger directly at Marcus. Let's call her Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The wife of a minor hedge fund manager, Eleanor was a platinum status flyer who believed her miles gave her the right to govern the skies. A flight attendant whose name tag read Jessica hurried over. Jessica had a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had been ignoring Marcus for the last 20 minutes, bypassing him to offer champagne to the white passengers in 2A and 2B. "What seems to be the problem, Mrs. Vance?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with sycophantic honey. "The problem?" Eleanor snapped, gesturing at Marcus as if he were a stain on the upholstery. "Is that this man is in my seat. I specifically requested seat 1A. My husband is a Diamond Circle member. We always sit in 1A. Marcus lowered his tablet. He looked at Eleanor, then at Jessica. "I have my boarding pass right here." Marcus said, his voice deep and calm, the baritone rumble of a man used to boardrooms. "Seat 1A. Assigned at booking." He held up his digital pass. Eleanor didn't even look at it. She scoffed, rolling her eyes at the flight attendant. "Jessica, honestly, look at him. Does he look like he paid full fare for international first class? It's obviously a system glitch, probably an upgrade error. I paid for this cabin. He's probably using points or..." An employee pass. The air in the cabin grew thin. The implication hung there, ugly and undeniable. Jessica turned to Marcus. The honey was gone from her voice, replaced by the sharp, authoritative tone usually reserved for unruly children. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your ticket again, and your ID." "I just showed you the ticket," Marcus said, not moving. "And I've already cleared security. My ID is in my bag." "Well, get it," Eleanor barked. "I'm not standing here all day while you pretend to belong here." Marcus looked at Jessica. "Is this standard protocol to harass a seated passenger because another passenger wants their seat?" Jessica stiffened. "Sir, Mrs. Vance is one of our most valued clients. If there is a double booking, we need to resolve it. And frankly, we have had issues lately with fraudulent bookings." She let her eyes scan Marcus's hoodie, her lip curling slightly. Marcus felt the heat rise in his chest, a familiar fire he had learned to control decades ago. He slowly unzipped his bag, retrieved his passport, and handed it to Jessica. She snatched it, flipping it open. "Marcus Sterling," she read, sounding out the name as if checking a criminal database. She typed something into her handheld device. The device beeped green. Valid. Paid in full. Full fare, $14,000 one way. A smart employee would have stopped there. A smart employee would have apologized to Marcus and told Eleanor to sit in her assigned seat, which was likely B. But Jessica wasn't smart. She was prejudiced, and she was intimidated by the woman in the Chanel suit. "Well?" Eleanor demanded. Jessica bit her lip. She looked at the angry Platinum member, then at the quiet black man in the hoodie. She made a calculation. A fatal one. "There does seem to be a discrepancy." Jessica lied. She looked Marcus in the eye. "The system is flagging your ticket as a standby overflow. I'm afraid I can't clear you for 1A. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A standby overflow on a $14,000 ticket." "Computer glitches happen," Jessica said dismissively. "Mrs. Vance has priority status. I'm going to need you to gather your things. We have a seat available in economy comfort, row 34. The audacity was so breathtaking that Marcus almost laughed. Almost. "I'm not moving," Marcus said. He turned back to his tablet. "I suggest you find Mrs. Vance another seat." Eleanor gasped. "The arrogance. Do you hear him, Jessica? Get the captain. I want him off this plane. I don't feel safe with him here. He's aggressive." Marcus hadn't raised his voice above a conversational volume. "Sir," Jessica said, her voice rising, "if you do not comply, I will have to involve security. You are disturbing the flight crew and passengers." "I'm sitting in the seat I paid for," Marcus said, his eyes locking onto hers. "If you call the captain, make sure he knows exactly what you're doing. You are removing a paying first-class passenger based on the color of his skin to appease a loud woman with a platinum card. Think very carefully about your next move, Jessica." Jessica's face flushed red. She wasn't used to being spoken to with such authority by someone who looked like him. She pressed the call button on her comms. "Captain, we have a level 2 disturbance in first class. Passenger refusing crew instructions. Hostile behavior. I need assistance." The war had begun. 3 minutes later, the cockpit door opened. Captain Richard Halloway emerged. Halloway was an old-school pilot, a man with silver hair and a stomach that strained against his uniform buttons. He walked with the swagger of a man who believed the plane was his personal kingdom. He saw the scene: Eleanor Vance standing with her arms crossed, tapping her foot, Jessica looking flustered and victimized, and Marcus Sterling sitting calmly in seat 1A. Halloway didn't ask Marcus what happened. He turned to Eleanor. "Mrs. Vance," So sorry for the trouble. What's going on?" "This man," Eleanor pointed, "is in my seat, and he's refusing to leave. He's been threatening Jessica." Holloway turned his gaze on Marcus. He saw the hoodie. He saw the skin color. He saw the lack of deference. "Sir," Holloway barked, "grab your bag. Let's go." "Captain," Marcus said, keeping his voice level, "I am the ticket holder for seat 1A. Your flight attendant is lying about a system glitch because this woman wants my window seat. If you check the flight manifest, you will see I don't need to check anything." Holloway cut him off. "My flight lead tells me you're causing a scene. That's enough for me. You are now trespassing on my aircraft. You have two choices. You take the seat in row 34, or you get off the plane. Actually," Holloway paused, a cruel smirk touching his lips, "I don't like your attitude. You're not going to row 34. Holloway turned to Jessica. "Call the gate agent. Tell them to bring airport police. We're deplaning a passenger." The first-class cabin was dead silent. A young tech executive in 3A looked uncomfortable but said nothing. An older couple in 4B watched with wide eyes. No one intervened. They were all relieved it wasn't them. Marcus looked at Holloway. "Captain Holloway, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Is that a threat?" Holloway stepped closer, leaning over Marcus, invading his space. "Because threatening a flight crew is a federal offense, son." "It's not a threat," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly low register. "It's a courtesy. I'm giving you one chance to save your career. Check the manifest. Look at the name." "I don't care what your name is," Holloway spat. "You could be the President of the United States, and you'd still get off my plane if I said so. Now get up." Two airport police officers, heavy-set men with tired eyes, squeezed into the cabin. "Problem, Captain?" one officer asked. "Disruptive passenger, refusing orders, trespassing. Get him off." Holloway waved his hand dismissively. The officer looked at Marcus. "Sir, you need to come with us." Marcus stood up. He towered over Holloway. For a second, the captain looked nervous, but Marcus simply smoothed his hoodie. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He picked up his leather weekender bag. He turned to Mrs. Vance, who was smirking triumphantly. "Enjoy the seat, Mrs. Vance. I hope it's worth it." Then he turned to Jessica. "You have a name tag. Remember it. You won't be wearing it much longer." Finally, he looked at Captain Holloway. "Captain, you're worried about a delay. You have no idea." "Get him out of here," Eleanor shouted. "Scum!" As the police escorted Marcus down the aisle past the gawking passengers in business and the crowded rows of economy, the humiliation was absolute. People held up phones filming the unruly passenger being kicked off. He could hear the whispers. Probably drunk. Must have attacked someone. Typical. They walked him up the jet bridge and into the terminal. The heavy door of the aircraft thudded shut behind him. Marcus stood in the sterile light of the gate area. The gate agent, a man named Timothy, looked at him with pity. "Sorry about that, man. Holloway is a piece of work." The police officers released his arm. "Look, buddy, the captain wants you off. We got to take a report, but if you leave quietly, we won't press charges for the disturbance." Marcus looked at the officers. He looked at the closed door of the jet bridge. Then he pulled out his phone. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his wife. He dialed a number that very few people in the world possessed. It was the direct private line of Arthur Pendleton, the chairman of the board for Regal Atlantic Airways, the man who had just sold the company to Marcus. "Hello," Arthur's voice answered after 2 rings. "Marcus, I thought you were in the air. Everything okay?" Marcus stared at the Regal Atlantic logo painted on the wall behind the desk. "Arthur," Marcus said, his voice ice cold. "We have a problem. I'm at JFK. I was just thrown off Flight 902 by the captain and the flight lead." There was a silence on the other end, so profound it felt like the line had gone dead. "Excuse me," Arthur sputtered. You were thrown off. Did they know who you are?" "No," Marcus said. "I was traveling incognito as we discussed. A woman wanted my seat. The crew decided I didn't look like I belonged in first class. They called the police Arthur." "Oh my God," Arthur breathed. "Marcus, I am so sorry. I will call the station manager immediately. We will get you on the next flight." "No, Arthur." Marcus cut him off. "I'm not getting on the next flight, and you're not calling the station manager." I don't understand." "I want you to ground the plane," Marcus said. "Marcus, that flight is fully loaded. It's pushing back from the gate. The cost of grounding it—" "Arthur," Marcus said softly, "read the contract we signed this morning. Who has operational control of the fleet as of 12 endorse p.m. today?" Arthur hesitated. "Technically, you do. Sterling Vanguard does." "Correct. I own the airline, Arthur, and I am telling you to ground Flight 902 immediately. Do not let it take off. Turn it around. Bring it back to the gate." "And then what?" Arthur asked, his voice trembling. "And then," Marcus said, watching the plane through the window as it began to taxi, "I'm going to fire every single person who touched this situation. But first I want to get back on that plane." "You want to get back on?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I have a seat to reclaim. Turn the plane around, Arthur, now." Inside the cockpit of Flight 902, the atmosphere was one of self-satisfied triumph. Captain Richard Halloway adjusted the throttle levers, guiding the massive beast of an aircraft onto the taxiway. The vibration of the engines was a low, comforting hum in his bones, a feeling he had loved for 30 years. He felt lighter, unburdened. Dealing with that passenger, that instigator in seat 1A, felt like popping a blister. It was necessary. It was clean. "Unbelievable, the entitlement these days," Halloway muttered into his headset, glancing at his first officer, a younger man named Kenji, who was busy checking the flap settings. Kenji hesitated. He hadn't liked how the situation was handled. He had seen the man's face, Marcus the passenger, and there was something about his eyes that had unsettled Kenji. But Kenji was 26, and Halloway was a legend in the airline. "You didn't question the captain." "Yeah, Rick," Kenji said, keeping his voice neutral. "Hopefully we can make up the time in the air. We're already 20 minutes behind schedule." "We'll catch a tailwind over the Atlantic," Halloway said dismissively. "Better to be late than to fly with a security risk. You saw him. Guy looked like he was ready to snap." Back in the first-class cabin, the mood was celebratory. The air smelled of freshly popped champagne and warmed mixed nuts. Eleanor Vance reclined in seat 1A, her seat. She ran her hand over the leather armrest, reclaiming her territory. She turned to her husband Greg, a balding man who was already immersed in a golf magazine, trying to pretend the last 20 minutes hadn't happened. "Finally." Eleanor sighed, taking a sip of her mimosa. "I honestly don't know why they let people like that into this cabin. It ruins the entire ambiance. Did you see his shoes? Sneakers? In first class." Jessica, the flight lead, walked by with a silver tray. She offered Eleanor a hot towel with a conspiratorial smile. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Mrs. Vance," Jessica cooed. "Captain Halloway is very strict about cabin safety. We don't tolerate aggression." "You handled it beautifully, Jessica," Eleanor said, dabbing her face. I'll be sure to mention you in my review letter to corporate. You deserve a commendation. Thank you, Ma'am. Jessica beamed. She felt a rush of adrenaline. She had defended the airline's best customers. She had done her job. The plane turned onto the main taxiway, falling in line behind a Delta flight and a British Airways heavy. They were number 3 for takeoff. The engines whined, preparing for the power needed to lift 300 tons into the sky. And then the radio in the cockpit crackled. It wasn't the usual rhythmic chatter of air traffic control giving wind speeds or runway clearances. The tone was different, urgent, sharp. Regal 902 Tower. Halloway pressed the transmit button. Regal 902 Go Ahead Tower. Ready for departure in sequence. Negative Regal 902. The controller's voice came back, loud and startlingly clear. Cancel takeoff clearance. I repeat, cancel takeoff clearance. Halloway frowned, his brow furrowing. Tower, say again. We are number 3. Everything looks green on our end. Regal 902. This is a mandatory ground stop order. You are to exit the queue immediately at Taxiway Charlie and return to gate B14. Acknowledge. Halloway felt a spike of irritation. Tower. What is the reason? Mechanical weather. We are perfectly fine here. There was a pause on the radio. A static-filled silence that felt heavy. Regal 902, the order comes from dispatch. Priority 1. Operational hold. Return to gate immediately. Do not, I repeat, do not take off. In the cockpit, the silence was deafening. Kenji looked at Halloway, his eyes wide. Priority 1. I've never heard a Priority 1 called for a taxiing aircraft unless there's a bomb threat. It's not a bomb threat. Halloway snapped through his stomach, gave a strange lurch. It's probably paperwork. Some idiot in compliance missed a signature on the cargo manifest. Unbelievable. He slammed his hand against the console. This is going to cost us an hour. The passengers are going to eat me alive. Halloway grabbed the PA microphone. He took a deep breath, forcing his captain's voice, that smooth, reassuring baritone that calmed nervous flyers. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. I'm afraid I have some bad news. We've been ordered by the tower to return to the gate for a minor administrative issue. It shouldn't take long. We'll just pull back, sort out the paperwork, and get you on your way to London. Sit tight. In seat 1A, Eleanor Vance groaned loudly, throwing her head back. Oh, for God's sake. What now? Another delay, her husband mumbled. Jessica hurried down the aisle, her face a mask of professional concern. I'm sure it's just a refueling issue, Mrs. Vance. Can I top off your champagne while we taxi back? The massive plane shuddered as Halloway applied the brakes and turned the nose wheel. The turn was sharp, almost angry. They left the line of departing planes, looking like a defeated animal retreating from the pack. The taxi back to the gate was excruciatingly slow. Every bump in the tarmac felt magnified. The view out the window shifted from the open promise of the runway back to the cluttered industrial reality of the terminal. Halloway was fuming. He was mentally drafting the furious email he would send to the station manager. He was going to have someone's head for this. He pulled the aircraft up to gate B14, the same gate they had pushed back from only 20 minutes ago. The jet bridge began to extend, moving towards the plane like a slow mechanical finger. Kenji, Halloway barked. Keep the engines on standby. I'm going to go out there, yell at the gate agent, sign whatever paper they forgot, and we are leaving in 10 minutes. Captain, Kenji said softly. Look at the jet bridge. What about it? There are suits out there. A lot of them. Halloway squinted through the cockpit glass. Standing in the terminal window watching the plane dock was not just the gate agent. There was a cluster of men in dark suits. and standing in the center of them, looking calm and unmoving, was the man in the hoodie. A cold shiver, irrational and piercing, went down Holloway's spine. "He's still there," Holloway whispered. "Why the hell is he still there?" The cabin door opened with a heavy, mechanical thunk. Usually when a plane returns to the gate, there is noise, confusion, the sound of passengers unbuckling, asking questions, phones pinging. But on Flight 902, a strange hush had fallen over the front cabin. The first-class passengers, sensing the tension radiating from the crew, stopped talking. They watched the open door. Captain Holloway stormed out of the cockpit. He adjusted his hat, puffing out his chest. He was ready for a fight. He marched to the open door, ready to berate Timothy, the gate agent. "Timothy," Holloway shouted as he stepped onto the metal threshold of the plane. "What is the meaning of—" The words died in his throat. Timothy was there, yes. But Timothy was pushed against the wall, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. Standing directly in front of the door, blocking the exit, was David Ross. David Ross was the station manager for JFK, the highest-ranking official for Regal Atlantic in New York. David was a man who usually sat in a glass office 3 terminals away. He never came down to the jet bridge. Never. Behind David stood 2 men in black suits who looked like corporate legal counsel, and 2 more airport police officers. Different ones this time. And behind them, all leaning casually against the railing of the jet bridge, looking at his phone, was Marcus Sterling. "Mr. Ross," Holloway stammered. The anger drained out of him, replaced by a sudden sickening confusion. What are you doing here?" "We have a manifest error, I was told." "Captain Holloway," David Ross said. His voice was trembling. He looked like a man who was witnessing a live execution. "Please step aside." "Step aside. I'm the captain of this vessel. I need to know why my flight was grounded." "You are not the captain of this vessel anymore," a voice said from the back. It wasn't David Ross. Marcus Sterling pushed off the railing. He walked forward slowly. The space was cramped, the lighting industrial and harsh. Marcus moved with a fluid, predatory grace. He didn't look at Holloway. He looked past him into the cabin. "You," Marcus said, pointing a finger at Holloway, not touching him, but getting close enough that Holloway could smell the mint on Marcus's breath. "Move." "Now wait a minute." Holloway bristled, his ego trying to assert itself one last time. "You were removed from this flight. You are trespassing. Officers—" Holloway looked at the police behind Marcus. The officers didn't move. They stared at their boots. David Ross stepped forward, sweat beading on his forehead. "Rick," he whispered harshly, "shut up, for the love of God. Shut up and move." "Why?" Holloway demanded, his voice cracking. David Ross closed his eyes for a second, as if praying. "Because he bought the airline, Rick. He bought it this morning." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Captain Richard Holloway. The sounds of the airport, the distant announcements, the whine of APUs faded into a buzzing white noise. "What? Mr. Sterling," David Ross said, turning to Marcus with a bow that was almost a curtsy. "Please, the aircraft is yours." Marcus walked past Holloway. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He didn't even acknowledge the captain's existence. He treated Holloway like a piece of furniture, an obsolete piece of furniture that was about to be thrown out. Marcus stepped onto the plane. The moment he crossed the threshold, the dynamic in the first-class cabin shifted violently. Jessica, the flight lead, was standing in the galley holding a bottle of water. When she saw Marcus walk in, she dropped it. The plastic bottle hit the floor with a loud thwack rolling down the aisle. She stared at him. "Sir, you can't be here. The police." Marcus ignored her. He walked slowly down the aisle. The carpet felt soft under his sneakers. He could feel the eyes of every passenger on him. The tech executive in 3A took his headphones off, mouth agape. The older couple in 4B stopped whispering. Marcus stopped at row 1. Eleanor Vance looked up. She had been texting, complaining to her friends about the delay. She lowered her phone. Her sunglasses were still on. "You again," she hissed. "Are you insane? I told the captain to get rid of you. Do you want to go to jail?" Marcus looked down at her. He looked at the seat she was sitting in. He looked at the champagne flute in her hand, champagne that he had technically paid for. "Mrs. Vance," Marcus said. His voice was low, smooth, and carried to the back of the cabin. "I believe you are in my seat." "I am in my seat," Eleanor shrieked, looking around for support. "Jessica, Captain, he's back. Do something." Jessica was frozen in the galley. Halloway was standing in the doorway, looking like he was having a stroke. No one moved. Marcus sighed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone again. He tapped the screen and held it up. "I'm not asking you to move because of a ticket, Mrs. Vance," Marcus said. "I'm asking you to move because you are currently trespassing on private property, my private property." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor spat. "This is a public airline. As of 12:00 p.m. today," Marcus said, "Regal Atlantic Airways is a wholly owned subsidiary of Sterling Vanguard. I am Marcus Sterling." He paused to let the name sink in. He saw the recognition spark in the eyes of the tech executive in 3A. "I own the plane." Marcus continued, his voice hardening. "I own the seat you are sitting in. I own the champagne you are drinking. I own the uniform the pilot is wearing. And right now I am deciding who gets to stay in my house." He leaned in closer to Eleanor. "And I have a strict policy against racism in my house." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at Jessica, then at the captain, desperate for someone to tell her this was a joke. But Halloway was staring at the floor, and David Ross, the station manager, was now standing in the aisle behind Marcus, looking grim. "Mr. Sterling," David Ross said, his voice shaking. "How would you like to proceed?" Marcus stood up straight. He adjusted his cuffs. The silence in the cabin was heavy, thick with the impending violence of consequences. "First," Marcus said, pointing at Eleanor, "get her off my plane and ban her for life." "You can't do that," Eleanor screamed, jumping up. "I'm platinum." "My husband knows." "Your husband knows nothing," Marcus said calmly. "Refund her ticket. Put her on the no-fly list for Regal and every partner airline we work with. She walks home." "And second?" David Ross asked, taking out a notepad. Marcus turned slowly to face the galley, where Jessica was trembling, tears welling up in her eyes. Then he looked back at the doorway, where Captain Halloway stood, a man whose career was evaporating before his eyes. "Second," Marcus said. "Marcus, I need a new flight crew, because everyone currently wearing a uniform on this plane is fired, effective immediately." The word "fired" didn't just hang in the air. It sucked the oxygen out of the cabin. For a flight crew, the aircraft is more than a workplace. It is a sovereign state where their word is law. To be stripped of that command in front of an audience is a death sentence for the ego. Captain Richard Halloway was the first to break the silence. He let out a dry, incredulous laugh. It was the sound of a man trying to convince himself that gravity didn't exist while falling off a cliff. "You can't do that," Holloway said, stepping fully into the cabin, his chest heaving. "You can't just walk onto a flight deck and fire a senior captain with 30 years of tenure. I have a union. I have a contract. Who do you think you are?" Marcus turned his head slowly. He didn't look at Holloway's face. He looked at the 4 gold stripes on Holloway's shoulder, epaulets, the symbol of his rank. "David," Marcus said softly, addressing the station manager, without breaking his gaze from Holloway's shoulder. "Please explain the gross misconduct clause in the standard Regal Atlantic pilot contract, specifically Section 4, Paragraph B." David Ross, the station manager, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. He swallowed hard, wiping sweat from his upper lip with a handkerchief. "Section 4, David recited, his voice cracking, "states that any crew member who willfully discriminates against a passenger or uses their authority to enforce a removal based on bias rather than safety is subject to immediate termination for cause. All severance is forfeited. All flight benefits are revoked." Holloway's face turned a shade of grey usually reserved for old ash. "This wasn't discrimination." He stammered, his voice losing its boom. "It was a misunderstanding, a safety issue." He was aggressive. "I have the cabin audio," Marcus said. He held up his phone. He hadn't just called Arthur Pendleton earlier. He had started a voice recording the moment Jessica had asked for his ID. "I recorded the entire interaction." Marcus lied, or perhaps he didn't. In that moment it didn't matter. The threat was enough. "I have you calling me boy. I have you refusing to check the manifest. I have you removing a calm, paying customer to please a friend." Marcus took one step closer to Holloway. The physical difference between them was stark. Holloway was soft-padded by years of sitting in a cockpit. Marcus was coiled steel. "You didn't just break policy, Richard," Marcus said, using the captain's first name like a reprimand to a child. "You broke the trust of the brand I just spent $4 billion to acquire. You are a liability, and I don't keep liabilities." Marcus held out his hand, palm open, expectant. "Your badge," Marcus said, "and your airport security ID, now." I need to get my flight bag from the cockpit," Holloway whispered. "David will get your bag," Marcus said. "Give me the badge." Holloway looked around the cabin. He looked at the passengers he had sworn to protect, who were now watching him with a mixture of pity and disgust. He looked at the police officers who made no move to help him. With trembling fingers, Captain Holloway unclipped his airport ID from his shirt. He unpinned his wings. He placed them in Marcus's hand. "Get off my plane," Marcus said. Holloway slumped. He looked 20 years older than he had 5 minutes ago. He shuffled past Marcus, past the police, and disappeared up the jet bridge, a king exiled from his own castle. Then Marcus turned to Jessica. Jessica was pressed against the galley wall, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. She wasn't defiant like Holloway. She was terrified. She knew exactly what she had lost. This job was her life, her identity. "Mr. Sterling," she sobbed, her hands clasped together. "Please, I have a mortgage. I didn't know. Mrs. Vance, she pressured me. I was just trying to keep the peace." Marcus looked at her with a calm, detached sadness. It was the look a judge gives a defendant before passing a sentence that cannot be appealed. "That is the problem, Jessica," Marcus said gently. "You were willing to humiliate me to keep her peace. You looked at me, and you saw someone who didn't matter. You saw someone you could bully." I'm sorry, she wept. I'm so sorry. I'll apologize. I'll do anything. I believe you are sorry, Marcus said. I believe you are sorry that I turned out to be the owner. But if I had been a school teacher, or an engineer, or just a regular man going on vacation, you wouldn't be sorry. You'd be laughing about it in the galley right now. He gestured to the door. Character is how you treat people who can do nothing for you, Marcus said. You failed the test. Badge. Please. Jessica sobbed loudly, a raw, ugly sound that echoed in the quiet cabin. She fumbled with her lanyard. She handed it over. Please, she whispered one last time. Go, Marcus said. She ran. She didn't walk. She ran out of the cabin, shielding her face with her hands, the sound of her heels clicking frantically on the jet bridge floor until they faded away. The cabin was silent. The only sound was the low hum of the aircraft's air filtration system. Marcus stood in the center of the debris of 2 careers. He placed the badges in his pocket. He didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. He turned slowly to seat 1A. Eleanor Vance had watched the executions with her mouth open. She was still holding her champagne glass, though her hand was shaking so badly the liquid was rippling. She had expected the captain to throw Marcus out. She had expected the police to arrest him. She had not expected to watch the captain be stripped of his rank by a man in a hoodie. But denial is a powerful drug. Eleanor Vance was a woman who had never heard the word no in her adult life. She convinced herself that this was just an employee dispute. She was a customer. She was untouchable. When Marcus turned his eyes toward her, she straightened her back. She put on her armor of indignation. Well? Eleanor sniffed, trying to regain her composure. That was very dramatic. I hope you're happy. You've delayed this flight by an hour with your little power trip. She took a sip of champagne, looking away from him. I suppose you'll want me to move to 1B now. Since you fired the crew, there's no one to move my bags. Marcus stared at her. He marveled at the density of her entitlement. It was almost impressive, like a black hole that swallowed all logic. Mrs. Vance, Marcus said, I think you misunderstood. You aren't moving to 1B. Excuse me, you are getting off the plane. Eleanor laughed. It was a shrill, nervous sound. Don't be ridiculous. I have a ticket. I am a platinum member. You can't kick me off just because you bought the airline. That's illegal. Discrimination. Discrimination, Marcus repeated the word, tasting the irony. No, it's a refusal of service. And as the owner, I reserve the right to refuse service to anyone who abuses my staff or harasses my other customers. And you, Mrs. Vance, are the root cause of this entire incident. I did nothing, she screeched. I just asked for my seat. You profiled me, Marcus said. You demanded I be removed because I didn't fit your idea of what wealth looks like. And now you are going to experience what it feels like to be removed. Marcus looked at the 2 police officers who were still waiting by the door. Officers, Marcus said, this passenger is trespassing. I would like her removed from the aircraft. If she resists, I would like to press charges for disorderly conduct. The officers stepped forward. They weren't smiling anymore. They had seen who held the power here. Ma'am, the first officer said, his hand resting on his belt. Let's go. Grab your things. No. Eleanor shouted, grabbing the armrests. Greg, do something, tell them. She turned to her husband in seat 1B. Greg Vance had been silent this entire time. He was a man who worked in mid-level finance. He knew the name Sterling Vanguard. He knew the reputation of Marcus Sterling. He knew that Sterling Vanguard could buy and sell his own firm 10 times over before breakfast. Greg looked at his wife, whose face was twisted in an ugly snarl of rage. Then he looked at Marcus Sterling, the man who held the keys to the kingdom. Greg made a calculation. "Greg!" Eleanor screamed. "Call the lawyers! Tell him who we are!" Greg slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. He looked at Marcus. "Mr. Sterling," Greg said, his voice trembling slightly. I want to apologize. I had no part in this. I told her to let it go." Eleanor froze. She looked at her husband as if he had stabbed her. "Greg, I'm not getting dragged into this, Elle," Greg muttered, avoiding her eyes. "You went too far. You always go too far." Greg looked at Marcus. "Sir, I have a meeting in London I cannot miss. Is my seat also revoked?" It was a brutal moment. A husband bargaining for his seat while his wife was being evicted. Marcus looked at Greg with a mixture of pity and disdain. He saw a weak man. "Your ticket is valid, Mr. Vance," Marcus said coldly. "You are welcome to fly with us, but your wife is leaving." Greg nodded, his face red with shame. He sat back down. He picked up his golf magazine. He didn't look at his wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor Vance was alone, abandoned by the crew, abandoned by the law, and now abandoned by her husband. "You coward!" Eleanor screamed at Greg. She threw the contents of her champagne glass at him. The liquid splashed over his suit and the expensive leather seat. "That's enough," the police officer barked. The two officers moved in. One grabbed Eleanor's left arm, the other her right. They hauled her out of the seat. She kicked and screamed, her Chanel heels scuffing the bulkhead. "Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I will sue this entire airline. I will burn this place to the ground." "You'll have to buy it first," Marcus said calmly as they dragged her past him. She flailed as they marched her down the aisle, her screams of "Greg, Greg" fading as she was pulled into the jet bridge. The door to the jet bridge remained open. The cabin was still. The air smelled of spilled champagne and expensive perfume. Marcus stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade. He looked at the empty seat 1A. It was just a chair, leather foam and metal. It was amazing how much ugliness one chair could generate. He turned to David Ross. "David," Marcus said, "get a cleaning crew to wipe down seat 1B. Mr. Vance has had a spill." "Yes, sir," David said, scribbling on his notepad. And David, "Sir, call the reserve flight crew. I believe Captain Henderson is on standby. He's a good man. I flew with him once, years ago. Get him down here, and get a new flight lead, someone from the diversity committee. I want this plane in the air in 45 minutes. "It will be done, Mr. Sterling." David Ross hurried off the plane. Marcus let out a long breath. He adjusted his hoodie. He walked over to seat 1A, his seat. He sat down. He buckled the belt. He looked across the aisle at the tech executive in 3A, who was staring at him with wide, reverent eyes. Marcus offered a small, tired smile. "Sorry for the delay," Marcus said. "Hopefully the service will be better from here on out." The tech exec nodded furiously. No problem at all." Marcus leaned back and closed his eyes. The plane was quiet. The toxic element had been purged. But he knew the story wasn't over. The fallout would be public, and it would be messy. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Today, he was just going to London. The flight to London was smooth, But inside the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was thick with a heavy, suffocating silence. The new flight crew was impeccable. Captain Henderson, a man with a gentle voice and steady hands, had taken over the cockpit. The new flight lead, a young woman named Sarah, moved through the cabin with grace, treating Marcus with a professional reverence that bordered on fear. But the real drama was happening in row 1. Marcus Sterling sat in seat 1A, working quietly on his laptop. He was reviewing the financials of Regal Atlantic, already making notes on which executives to replace. He seemed completely at ease, a man who had already forgotten the storm he had just caused. In seat 1B, however, Greg Vance was falling apart. Without his wife, Greg was a ship without a rudder. He drank 3 scotches in the first hour. He shifted constantly in his seat. He kept glancing at Marcus, opening his mouth to speak, then closing it again. The shame of remaining on the plane while his wife was dragged off was eating him alive. But his ambition was stronger than his shame. Somewhere over the Atlantic, around 2:00 a.m. London time, the alcohol gave Greg enough liquid courage to speak. "Mr. Sterling," Greg whispered, leaning across the aisle. Marcus didn't look up from his screen. "Mr. Vance. I just wanted to say again," Greg stammered, his voice slurring slightly. "I respect what you did back there, really. Eleanor, she's a lot to handle. You know how women can be, hysterical. I've been thinking of leaving her for years, honestly. She's a liability to my image." Marcus stopped typing. His fingers hovered over the keys. For the first time in hours, he turned his head to look at the man next to him. "You're trying to bond with me," Marcus said, his voice flat. "Well, I mean, we're both businessmen," Greg said, forcing a smile. "I work for Blackstone in their mergers division. I know Sterling Vanguard is looking into European markets. I thought maybe, given the circumstances, we could turn this into an opportunity. I could show you some deal flow." It was a moment of cowardice so profound it was almost breathtaking. Greg Vance was trying to network over the metaphorical corpse of his marriage. Marcus closed his laptop. He turned his entire body to face Greg. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said quietly, "let me tell you why I fired Captain Halloway." Greg blinked. "Because he was racist. Because he was weak," Marcus corrected. "He let a loud voice push him into doing the wrong thing. He had no code, no loyalty to the truth." Marcus leaned in his eyes, dark and piercing. "And you," Marcus continued, "you are worse. You sat there and watched your wife, the woman you vowed to protect, get thrown off a plane. You didn't stand up for her. You didn't get off with her. You chose a leather seat and a glass of scotch over your own family. And now you're trying to sell her out to get a job with me." Greg's face went pale. The scotch turned sour in his stomach. "I don't hire cowards, Mr. Vance," Marcus said, turning back to his window. "And I certainly don't do business with men who leave their partners behind at the gate. Enjoy the rest of the flight. It will be the last time you fly Regal Atlantic." Greg didn't speak for the remaining 4 hours. He stared at the seat back in front of him, realizing he had lost his wife and his dignity in a single afternoon. When Flight 902 touched down at Heathrow, the sun was rising over London. As the plane taxied to the gate, the "Fasten Seatbelt" sign turned off. A chorus of dings filled the cabin as passengers turned their phones off airplane mode. Suddenly, the tech executive in seat 3A, the young man named Jason, gasped. "Holy," Jason whispered, staring at his phone. "Mr. Sterling, you need to see this." Marcus stood up and looked at the young man's screen. It was Twitter X. The #1 trending topic in the United States and the United Kingdom was hashtag Flight 902. Jason had filmed the entire incident. He had caught Eleanor screaming. He had caught Holloway threatening Marcus. He had caught Marcus revealing he was the owner. He had caught the moment the police dragged Eleanor away, while Greg sat down and opened his golf magazine. The video had 45 million views. The captions were brutal. The moment the CEO buys the airline to fire the racist pilot is pure gold. Look at the husband. He stayed on the plane. Regal Atlantic just got the cleanup it needed. But the karma went deeper. As they walked off the jet bridge and into Heathrow Terminal 5, Greg Vance turned his phone on. It buzzed instantly. It wasn't a text from Eleanor. It was an email from his managing director at Blackstone. The subject line was immediate suspension. Mr. Vance, due to the viral nature of the video currently circulating from Flight 902 and your conduct displayed therein, which reflects poorly on our firm's values of integrity and loyalty, you are suspended pending an investigation. Do not come to the London office. Greg dropped his phone. He stood in the middle of the terminal, surrounded by travelers completely alone. Marcus walked past him. He was flanked by his security team, who had met him at the gate. He didn't look back at Greg. He walked out of the terminal and into a waiting black Range Rover. As the car pulled away, Marcus took out his phone and called Arthur Pendleton back in New York. "Arthur," Marcus said. "Marcus." Arthur sounded breathless. "The stock price. Have you seen it?" "Tell me," Marcus said. "It's up 12%, Arthur said. "The internet is going crazy. They're calling it the Sterling Standard. People are booking tickets just to support the brand. You fired a toxic crew, and the market loves it." Marcus looked out the window at the grey London sky. He thought about the look on Jessica's face, the arrogance of Holloway, and the entitlement of Eleanor. "Good," Marcus said. "Now issue the press release. We're rebranding. And Arthur Hall, yes. Make sure seat 1A is always reserved for me." The story of Marcus Sterling is a powerful reminder that true power doesn't need to scream. It doesn't need to cut lines or demand special treatment. True power is patient. It waits for the right moment to reveal itself. Eleanor Vance and Captain Holloway made the fatal mistake of judging a man by his appearance. They saw a hoodie and skin color, and they assumed weakness. They didn't know they were poking a sleeping lion. In the end, they didn't just lose their seats. They lost their careers, their reputations, and their dignity. All because they forgot the golden rule. Treat everyone with respect because you never know who you're talking to. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, hit that like button right now. It really helps the channel grow, and I want to know what you would have done if you were in Marcus's shoes. Would you have fired them, or would you have done something even worse? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. We post new dramas every single week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, because karma is always watching.